Hi, Stephanie. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Dr. Ping.
Yeah, I think the first time I met you in person is at the event, the Johnson County GOP. They had the kind of like a seminar, and we have the I forgot his name,
Mike Gonzalez.
Mike Gonzalez. Yeah, he was talking about
Mhm.
the communism and all that. But you give a very passionate speech there. So I was very impressed.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So when did you get involved?
Um, wow. Well, when I really started my research really started back in probably around 2014, 2015.
Wow,
That was my first inkling that I started seeing some stuff going on. And at that point, I decided to homeschool.
right.
And from there, I just kept kind of looking. I started seeing some things that were happening. And then by the time my oldest one was in third grade at the time, and we were going through diagnosis for autism.
Okay.
So I had run the gamut for special education with him. So I had seen the ins and outs, and I had seen what it was going to be and the services that he needed.
Okay. So what was your concern at that time? Like 2014, 2015, that made you to make that decision? Because that was not a,
it wasn't on
not
our radar here
okay.
in Indiana at the time. I had followed Heidi St. John out in Washington,
Oh, okay.
who is a prominent homeschooler. So
Okay.
she's one of them that I had followed, and I had seen when I had started researching what it would take to get into homeschooling. And so when I started seeing the things that were happening out there, it just kind of confirmed my decision that I really needed to homeschool. So it wasn't so much that we were really seeing a lot of that here per se. It was, we were seeing it gradually over time.
Okay. So what you see, that you were at the Washington, D.C. at that time, right?
No, I was here in Indiana.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so what I started seeing was, once my children, my two oldest boys, I have four children. Two are in, right now I have 10th grade, 9th grade, I have a second grader, and I have a kindergartner.
Right.
So once my oldest one, I homeschooled through 6th grade, 7th grade, I decided I let fear set in, and I thought, well, maybe perhaps we're not seeing what was coming down the pipe for social emotional learning. And I put my sons back in middle school to prep them for high school.
Okay.
And those 2 years is the time frame where I saw the culmination of, this is where we're at. It is actually here in social emotional learning.
Okay, so you see that social emotional learning in 2014 and 15, that time frame.
It actually was a little bit later than that.
Okay.
But that's when I really started digging in and seeing some stuff. And then within the last 2 years here is when I really noticed predominantly a lot of it that was really starting to kick in. And when I started the social emotional learning aspect of it, we saw that social emotional learning roots were really in the Title I programs. And so those are actually programs that were designed specifically for children like my son for autism that have executive functioning disabilities. So there's times where they can't control their emotions.
Right.
So when I started looking at all this stuff and I dug into what social emotional learning was and what its roots were, I was baffled as to why this was being unveiled, enrolled in all schools across for all kids.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, when I heard about social emotional learning, I mean, it didn't alarm me. I just say, oh, yeah, sounds good, right? I mean, that's a lot of things when they push to the public school, it always sounds good. So, but what in specific, or what in particular that make you concerned?
It was really just there were several different things that I saw, but one of the biggest things was, so my son, as part of his IEP, was put into a class that was called Zones of Regulation. And so what this was classes for kids that needed control in behavior, specifically anger management, emotion management. And he walked into the class and it was the behavior problem kids, the kids that typically would either be getting expelled, detentions,
Okay,
the
okay.
kids that were in the class. And my son, while he never has any behavior issues, his is self-regulation for getting overwhelmed.
Right.
And they thought that it would benefit him. Well, he automatically assumed that he was being viewed as one of the bad kids by being in there.
Oh, wow.
And he didn't want that association. So he
Right.
didn't want to do that.
Okay.
So as I started seeing things that were happening at the middle school and administration mindset of with some of these kids that he happened to be around, because having an IEP for special education, he had to do what they called traveling. And traveling meant you were in the general education class, but then he had to go out and travel to the special education classroom to get his test read to him to make sure that he could understand them.
Okay.
So everything for his IEP had to be read to him.
Oh, okay.
So certain things that happened and occurred in the special education classrooms, most of them were, again, behavior problem kids that were in the class.
Okay.
And so as I fought to get him into the IEP to get the services he needed, I started realizing that maybe those were not the kids that he really needed to be around with the behavior issues. And so what we
Right.
were seeing was the zones of regulations, all these other programs that these kids were designed to be in that were supposed to be helping them were not helping them.
Okay. Okay.
And so
So,
that was some of the first signs that I started really seeing that this stuff was occurring. So one of the other signs that I saw was back in last January was the last time I had my 8th grader at the time in there. And one of the middle schoolers, one of his teachers online, I had moved them all to online learning because of COVID.
right.
And one of the teachers during the time had told the kids, it's Martin Luther King weekend. It's a long weekend. You students will have a long weekend. Why don't you look up and research BLM?
Oh,
And so that again was another red flag to me that, you know, there's a little bit more going on here behind the scenes.
okay. What subject was the teacher teaching?
It was an English subject.
Okay. So, and that's give to all the students, right?
Yes, all the kids that were online in the virtual class.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it
and I
gives-
kind of did a double take as to, wow, did I really just hear that? Then on the flip side, I had a 2nd grader that was online, and I had already reviewed all the social emotional learning competencies, the lesson plans, and the IDOE. So I was fully aware of it. And when I moved her online was behind 100 math pages in their workbook versus the kids that were in person.
Okay.
And so the very first thing they would do every morning is they would start in with a social emotional learning lesson. And the lesson was typically right off of verbatim, the Indiana Department of Education website, where they would click on the lesson and follow the prompts.
Okay.
So I was very familiar with it. So I just kind of was like, okay, we're spending a lot of time here doing social emotional learning virtually, and we're behind 100 pages in math versus where the kids that are in person.
Oh,
So I could see where we're giving up a lot of time to do what they felt was necessary in that regard.
okay.
So
Okay.
in my social emotional learning, when I started looking specifically at CASEL, because when you start looking at the IDOE website,
Right.
you'll see CASEL completely all over it. So when I
Right.
started researching and looking at CASEL, you can see that they started out in 1994
Right.
as a non-for-profit.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start looking at the history and the trends of where all this was going, I knew that it wasn't going to be good. And then that's
Okay.
when I started hearing and attending hearing Center Grove, and we were seeing the examples in Center Grove. We were seeing the examples in Carmel. So again, it just reiterated to me that homeschooling is where we needed to be. that
Okay.
this wasn't a fit for us in the public school. And as much time as I was spending babysitting my son's IEP and things weren't being met,
Okay.
it was time that we continued our homeschooling journey.
Right. Right.
And
Right. So you homeschooled your kids since they are in from the first grade, right? Then once you got to middle school, you send your son back to the public school.
yes, it was about second and third grade with my two younger ones.
Okay. And
Yeah, my two older ones. And then when my daughter got to the point to go into kindergarten, that's when I was making the adjustment, saying, okay, can I really do high school, homeschool, high
Right,
school
right.
here with two little ones? What's going to be the best use of my time? And again, I let fear set in, thinking I wouldn't be able to homeschool high school,
Right.
and I put him back in. And so that's where I really started seeing the things that were happening and started connecting the dots of what I had seen with Heidi out in Washington and the things that she was showing.
Oh,
And I'm
okay.
like, okay, we see the trend, we see the path
Right,
here.
right. So is Heidi a friend of yours?
She is actually just on Facebook. She has a Facebook group. She's
Oh,
actually
okay.
one of the homeschoolers. She actually has written several books, Becoming Mom Strong
Oh, okay.
and Getting Off the Bench. She now is a homeschooler mother of 7 out there, and she's now running for Congress out in Washington.
Is Washington State or Washington DC?
Washington State.
Okay.
Yeah, West Coast.
So
Mhm.
become mom strong?
Yes, Becoming Mom Strong.
Becoming
Mhm.
mommy strong. So that's trying to remember her name again.
Heidi St. John.
Heidi Heidi St. John.
Mhm.
Oh, wow. Well, definitely Washington State is is quite progressive. So
Yeah,
she probably have seen a lot of things that which uh we see a little bit later
sure.
in timelines. And so you're saying and you're suspecting that Castle has its own agenda to push uh social emotional learning.
Absolutely. So they actually have a timeline that's out on their website that you can see their history of when they started.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you'll see is back in 2016 is when they really took their push, and that was the initiative to push into each of the individual states their curriculum.
Mm.
So they went the legislative arm. And what we see in the state of Indiana is an SEA, the Senate Enrolled Act 529, which went through the legislation, and that was in 2005.
Mm.
That was one of the first big bills that was passed and signed by Governor Mitch Daniels at the time that
Okay.
enacted the basically social emotional well-being and health bill. So when you start seeing some of the progressiveness of it, of this is when it was, it just was really an eye opener that it was actually happening back then. And there was actually a tool that was used called Teen Screen. And this was back also in the time of 2005, 2006. And the research that I had seen on this was, it shockingly is pretty much like what we see with Panorama right now.
Mm.
And it asks questions that are very vague that can be construed. And there was actually an Indiana family that did a lawsuit against it
Oh, okay. Okay.
because of the findings. So
Right.
that survey abruptly ended back I believe like in 2012,
Okay.
and nobody knows why it
Mm.
ended, but it ended. And then they had other health screenings. So you can kind of see over the years things that have come and gone,
Right.
but not to the extent of what we see Castle and the push that's behind Panorama right now.
Okay. Yeah. So I haven't really spent that much time studying social emotional learning, just like uh, just with the little I know, it feels like social emotional learning is more like a ideology. I mean, there is ideology behind that, which is what very concerning.
Right.
So what kind of ideology do you think they were pushing?
Well, I think what we see in the undertones, so like the fundamentals of social emotional learning, like I said, some of it is probably pretty good.
Right.
Those are the aspects that we see that are tucked back in the title programs that really help those students that are deemed trauma.
Mm,
But because of COVID, every student now is traumatized. And that's the
okay.
basis of what we see social emotional learning in. So when we look at the ESSER funds, those are federal funds that are funneled down from the federal Department of Education down through the state. The state becomes the pass-through. The state also receives funds. The biggest push for social emotional learning was the re-entry plans for the schools. And they called it the safe re-entry plans, and it utilized social emotional learning because, again, all the kids coming back in school were deemed to be traumatized
Oh,
because of
wow.
COVID.
Wow.
So we see that when you have something on this grand scale that's pushed in with this framework and all the schools, which again, we have to realize social emotional learning is pushed from the state level. It was something that was adopted and put in by the Indiana Department of Education.
Right.
And we see it being renamed different things from social emotional learning that got stigmatized. So now it's employability skills.
Oh, okay. So they actually changed name on
So there's
us.
different names of it depending on the aspects, but that's a new one that they're pushing it as employability skills.
Okay. Okay. But what kind of message student will learn from this?
It depends on the grade level. Really, when you start looking at the early K through 5 levels, looking at the lesson plans that were put out by the IDOE, interesting enough, were put out there with the social competencies, and those were actually removed and taken down when they redid the website.
Okay.
Because what we were finding was that once you got to 6th grade, it was taking a turn into social justice.
I see.
And then by high school, it was social justice warriors. And at that point, the mindset. So really the focus on K through 5 was mentally of kids looking at each other, looking at their differences, understanding who they are. And I don't believe in K through 5, that's really what you want. Kids don't
Okay.
notice differences
Right.
in individuals unless we start pointing them out.
Right.
Once you start pointing out these differences, then that interweaves with the gender identity, all of those
Okay.
aspects
I
that
see.
we've got that we see that have political motivations.
Right.
behind
Right.
them.
So you could have like a elementary school student and go through this and think they are, well, let's say it's a boy, go through this, he might think he wants to be a girl. Right.
There are some that those we are seeing those examples that are being pushed, that those books, yes, indeed, are found in the libraries.
Okay.
And those books can be read in class when we're talking about gender identity, when we're talking
Okay.
about identity. And those are one of the big things that in K through 5, it's all about identity and how do we identify.
Okay. So, I mean, when people talk about SEL is a Trojan horse, that's what they mean by that, right? It
Yes.
sounds good, but
Yes.
looking those
It
social
sounds good
justice and
because we have the teachers being taught and bought that this is all about teaching kids how to be kind and nice, right? That's what we want. It all sounds good on the surface because
right.
that's what we want everybody to be that way.
Okay.
But up to this point, is that not what teachers have been doing all along?
Right.
Teachers lead by example,
Right.
and we teach others how to be nice by
Right.
our attitudes and actions.
Right. We don't need to do
We don't
something
need
different.
a full-blown program to teach
Right.
kids how to be nice. But what we see behind us is all the money that's pushed behind it.
Oh, okay.
So you then have Castle who comes in and can make all this money because we can get federal funds that flow down.
Okay.
Those schools then have to spend that money to buy into these different programs to meet qualifications to get the funds, the ESSER funds, to prove that they're doing social emotional learning.
Okay. Is that mask mandate part of the ESSER fund?
Yes, the mask mandate is underneath the ESSER funds as well. That again would fall underneath the safe re-entry plans.
Okay. Okay.
So there's kind of two different aspects of it. You kind of have the safe re-entry plan that has your mask mandates, anything that comes in the basis of staying, quote, healthy and having a healthy re-entry plan. And then the other aspect of it is the social emotional learning, because the kids have all been traumatized, and how do we handle the traumatized kid?
But how do they implement that? How do they actually at the school level, how do they actually make sure that was implemented? I mean, every
They
kids go
have
through this kind of training.
they have bought into programs. So they've either purchased Castle programs, which are most of the programs you're going to see are all pumped out and are part of Castle.
So who is teaching that? It's just like the
The
regular teacher?
teachers.
Okay.
And it usually what's been happening is in some schools, you'll see one of the guidance counselors we see in Center Grove guidance counselors are going in, and it's typically twice a month.
Mm.
But what happens is most of the stuff is intertwined and interweaved in each of the classes. We see it heavily in English. We see it heavily in history.
Oh, okay. Wow. So all the kind of language and social studies, and that's
Mhm,
put in there. Wow. Have you
right.
seen any case they put into like other, say, math and physics?
I have personally not,
Okay.
just from the standpoint of just in the timing that I focus on homeschool. A lot of this stuff has been in my research, the things that I've come across, the things that I've seen. But as far as math in different areas, what I've seen on it's all intertwined in it.
Mm.
And so what we see also in that aspect of it is we see them bringing in an equity. That's a big term that we keep
Right,
hearing
right.
is
Yeah, yeah,
equity.
definitely. Yeah, I have seen some of that in math textbooks. I mean, here and there, kind of
So again, that falls
not
under social emotional learning. This is
okay.
the umbrella that you will see all this stuff fall in.
So that's how like in order for the schools to get money, that's how they do it, right? You have to be implemented
Right. You have
in
to have something to
different
show the state that
right,
you're teaching it. And so if you have an invoice that you paid for a Castle program that you're implementing,
right,
those are the tangible things that you can do. Another
right.
tangible thing that we've seen happen is all school authors, book authors that come in. And I know a couple schools now have brought in Jason Reynolds.
Right.
Jason Reynolds has done co-authored
Yeah.
Stamped with Abram X. Kendi.
Hmm.
So again, there falls in, we're teaching social emotional learning. He is an author that fits into that category. We've checked the box. We've done social emotional learning. We can collect our ESSER funds.
Oh, I see. So it is possible that the school administration, uh, the school administration or administrators, they probably may not know exactly what was taught, right? For them, it's mostly just checking the box.
See, and there
Could
again,
be
not
that.
without me being in the building to understand, the ins and outs of it. Again, your administration, are they not accountable to know what the curriculum and the sign off? So I guess it's the protocols of,
Right,
who's really dictating and who's saying and approving this curriculum,
right, right.
because it would be part of the curriculum.
Yeah. And at least from the council's website and the way they look at it, first of all, that's a leverage to bring in social justice. That's how they view their program. And also they're looking at this as something, uh, uh, well, for example, I taught at Greenwood Christian Academy, right? And
Mhm,
so we at that time the administrator was talking about Bible permeation. So like the Bible is permeated into every subject. I
mhm.
mean, I mean, on the surface is a good thing, right? Uh, I think that's how the council look at SEL. So the SEL is
Yes,
kind of permeated. It's not just like one subject. It's everything. It's kind of
absolutely. And
yeah,
you'll see on Castle, they have tools, they have toolboxes on how to implement this across the board in all the subjects.
right. So it's really kind of I think their agenda behind it is actually really to change our kids into something like into a social activist.
Right. And
Mhm.
you hit it on the head. It's an ideology. It's like
Right,
as much as we don't want to say critical race theory, but when you look at that and you understand that that's a theory, and
right,
all we keep hearing is, there is no curriculum, it's not being taught. Well, it's a theory.
right. Yeah. So it's kind of like in a way, it's kind of like it's definitely his ideology and the way to look at things. It's kind of like
Mhm.
evolution is theory, right?
Right.
But many people look uh, using evolution to look at the world, so that become how they what their worldview is based on.
Right.
Yeah, I think SEL is kind of serving that, bringing some kind of worldview that as parents we may not agree with.
Exactly. So, and again, to use the words that they like to use in the programs is, what lens are we looking through here?
Right. Yep.
And so there's where it comes into objective versus subjective, because it's all dependent upon the lens.
Right.
But the lens that they currently want to use is the racial lens.
Right. Yeah. Everything is through that lens.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, like, if you look at the critical race theory, people like those theorists, they don't believe in objective truth. So they more kind of like they don't even believe in rationality, because to them that's kind of part of the white culture.
Right.
So more them, I mean, their approach is really, I mean, they made that clear. Their approach is through storytelling. I mean, right? Just tell a story.
Right.
This is my experience. How can you argue against that?
Right.
Right. But that's how they kind of, even though they don't believe objective truth, but they think their truth is the absolute. They think
Right.
they are right, and also they think that they can change history whatever the way they want, because there's no objective truth, right? Everything just
Exactly.
fit into their uh, agenda. Wow.
So
Okay.
what I just started seeing was a lot of it that really was down to parental rights, because at that point, if we're going to have this type of curriculum in, I have no control over
Right.
discussions in class. And
Right.
what we see is most of the stuff is, it's going to be verbal, it's going to be in class, it's going to be discussions.
Right.
And my whole problem was transparency in curriculum.
Right.
I wasn't able to get exactly the details. I would find out about something after the fact. Well, by that point, it's already done. You can't even opt out.
Right.
And even if you did opt out as a parent, you're the one, if you have a child with special needs, that is doing the work
Right.
with them. You're
Right.
doing a whole nother lesson. You're doing a whole nother book, a whole nother assignment when you opt out. So I think
Right.
that's what a lot of parents didn't understand, that, opt out is a feature, but you do realize, that that child is on its own having
Right.
to do another alternate assignment.
Right. Right. And it's the way it was implemented. It's impossible to opt out.
Right. And
Right.
that's what we're seeing, because you can't opt out of it because it is a state mandated program.
Right. Like
And
say.
so therefore you
Right.
cannot technically opt out.
Right. Like say, for example, I mean, if I teach a math lesson, right, then I'm going to use something to demonstrate racial inequality. How do you opt out that?
Right. Right. And then how do we see that on the flip side for your curriculum to show that you're teaching that lesson, so we know what's in that lesson to even be opt out?
Right.
So there's another
Yeah.
layer to it as well.
Right. Because you just cannot manage at that level. Right. I mean, say I'm teaching inequality, right? That's math. So I'm going to use examples to show the racial inequality. That won't be my lesson plan, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
what you see on surface is what teaching equations and inequality.
Absolutely. There's no detail of it. We don't see
Right.
the detail.
Right.
It's just a higher level. And that's how a lot of the stuff gets hidden and buried.
Right. And also, especially if the teachers are indoctrinated, they don't even realize that.
Right.
Because that's how they look at the world, right? They have that lens already. So of course they want
Right. Because they're attending the teacher meeting. There's
Right.
trainings that are happening behind the
Right.
scenes. We see all
Exactly.
that. We've seen all of it. And, even just things that you see online of books that teachers are reading that we know fall in the lines that go with critical race theory. They're authors that we know that are tied to it. And, one's safe to assume, we're reading that as what's the whole point, the gist behind it. We know that it becomes implemented in the classroom.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, really, if you look at it, it's really a communist takeover of our education system. Because the ideology of critical race theory is really neo-Marxism. But so now
Right.
they're actually using SOEL to kind of push that, you know,
Absolutely.
down to every, I mean, every grade pretty much.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think parents really needs to realize that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think that's how we kind of gotten this point, at least over the last 10 years, is parents have had this trust factor,
right.
I have to go to work, I have to go do this, this hasn't been on the radar. Um, they've been, quote, kind of safe, think that it's safe, and not really knowing what's happening behind the scenes. So while this
Right.
has kind of been gradually happening, well, we've had this decline of parental rights over the last at least 10 years that we
Right.
see
Right.
happening,
Yeah.
that nobody was really paying attention
Yeah.
because everybody was off busy doing their life, doing their work,
Exactly.
coming home, not having those discussion with their kids. And so I think that's where COVID came into play, where the parents
Yeah.
specifically saw,
Yeah.
kids online and what was actually being learned and what was being taught.
Right. Yeah, because they did actually gradually. That's why parents did not notice. Uh,
Hmm.
and also many things they say sounds good, right?
Right.
How can you against that? I mean, we wanted to help the emotional well-being, right? Or
Right.
maybe mental health, or
Hmm.
maybe social justice, right?
Hmm.
And we definitely you want to be an anti-racist. I mean,
Right.
what else can
Right.
you be, right? You definitely don't want
Right.
to be a racist. So everything
Hmm.
sounds nice on the surface. So the parents really, it's hard to say anything wrong until you actually see the details. You actually watch how the kids are learning, what they hear, just like in a regular uh, classroom kind of or regular lessons. Not, yeah, I think just because of COVID, parents actually was able to see what was actually taught, and
Right.
also to see how the teacher behave or teachers behave and what is their mindset.
Sure.
Yeah, because I know that definitely it has been a long time. I just don't know how many years go back. I mean, at least in like 2 decades. Is that um, people goes to like teacher colleges, and that's
Hmm.
where they learn. That's where they learn that their goal is to produce social activists. They should work for uh, a just society. I mean, who
Mm.
who didn't want that, right?
Right.
But then that changed everything, because now you have not only the teacher teach the academics, and now you have a you have something else. You have agenda. You want to change uh, kids into something that the parents may not like it.
Hmm.
But
Well, and we've
unfortunately,
seen that for kids that have gone off to college. So we see
right,
families that have kind of like mine, that you have the older and you have the younger. The
right,
older ones will go off to college. They come back home. The mindset is totally different.
right.
And I've heard that from parents that are like, how I didn't raise my child this way.
No, no, no. Yeah,
Where did this come from? Well,
right,
the only common denominality between it is we've been at school, right? They
right,
spend so much time at school, they've gone off to college, they've come back. The way they see things is very different.
right. I mean, to them, it makes sense because that's what they learned in
Hmm.
in high school or middle school, and now went to college. It just make them more articulate, right? Make them they
Sure.
be able, and also they have the independence, and they are, from their point of view, that they think their parents are uh, kind of behind, backwards.
Hmm.
They are not they are not enlightened like they were. I mean,
Right.
of course now the 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 fashionable word is woke, right? so
Hmm.
so they were woke, but the parents are not. So it caused that conflict. But it's I think in the past, parents were more kind of worried about colleges, and
Hmm.
but like you said, I mean, actually, it was earlier than that. It was in middle school and high school. We just didn't pay
Right.
attention. Like when
Right.
my,
And so then we even saw over the summer, we saw the NEA that put out their memorandum that actually came out and said that they were going to push
right,
critical race theory
yep,
K through 12.
right,
That memorandum got put out. We knew the intention underneath it. Well, then when they realized it was getting bad press, we pulled it back and said, no, 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 that wasn't the intention.
right,
Well, it's one of those things, you've already put it out there. You know, the parents all know the intention is
yep,
you're going to behind the scenes, you're going to push critical race theory in
right.
K through 12, even though we hear everybody say, no, 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 it's not happening.
Yeah, I think what they are doing now, they kind of on the surface say we're not teaching critical race theory, but then on the other hand, they're going to push SEL, and
Mhm.
the whole thing can just sneak in. I mean, they don't have to call that critical race theory,
Right,
right? They can call, social justice. I mean,
right.
I guess who can against that, right?
Mhm.
Uh, right, and
Absolutely.
yeah, and then actually there was something personally, my personal experience is that when my daughter was in middle school at Central Group, and she was mad at us because we do not approve homosexual marriage.
Mhm.
So you look at that, my she was grew up in the church, right?
Right.
And that in our household, we thought that, I mean, we definitely have a lot of time with her,
Mhm.
but that's what she learned in school. And
So the exposure had to be enough and great enough to make that impression on her.
right,
It's
and
not just a one offshoot that we're
no,
learning about it at one time. This
right,
is behavior that's learned, it's taught, it's accepted.
right. And so that's when I decided to instead to get her into high school, I had her enrolled at GCA, Grand Christian Academy. So
Mhm.
ninth grade, and one of her courses class is on Romans. So that just on that book. So after
Mhm.
that, she understand realized that homosexuality, mean hope, marriage, what it means by marriage, how God intended, and why homosexuality is wrong. But they just can't tell. I think a lot of parents do not realize that their peers has a lot more influence than the parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
yeah, this actually is a true story. When I was teaching at GCA, I actually uh, uh, asked one of my senior class. I said that if you're going to make a very important decision, could be life changing decision, who are you going to talk to? Uh, in the whole class, only just one person said she's going to talk with her mom,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
most of them say I'm talking to my best friend.
Mhm.
That's very
And
dangerous.
it's very dangerous. And you hit it right on the head there, is that's what we see is the decline of family values, the
Right,
family structure. Now, what we're seeing in the classrooms is the classroom is becoming the family.
right, and that's what
But
they push. Right, they
but
push.
does that where is the father figure? Where is the mother figure in a classroom? There isn't. There is
No,
one teacher. We
right,
have one teacher that's become head of the classroom, but we call it in terms of a family.
right.
So as society has changed our definition of what a family is, then we see the norms, we see the societal changes that go along with that that are deemed it's okay.
Yeah, and it's which I think a lot of parents did not realize that a lot of teaching now, and also a lot of teachers have mindset that maybe they may not realize it, but th- they are actually against parents' authority. Is that basically taking down the parents' authority? It's basically the
Absolutely.
message to the kids is that your parents are, uh, th- not progressive enough, right?
Right.
Not enlightened enough, and you guys now in school, you know more than your parents, so therefore, yeah,
Right.
don't listen to your parent.
Right.
Yeah, so
And the
that's
school wants to make the determining factor. They want to help make those decisions in lieu of the family.
right.
We had an instance with my seventh grader at the time. And I had to go to the administration, and one of the administrators pulled my son aside and was visibly upset that my son called me during school because of a situation. And I walked in the conference room as he was telling my son that, you shouldn't have called your mother. You should have
Huh.
come to me and we should have talked about this. And I stepped in and I said, no, he did exactly what he felt he needed because
Right.
he needed to call his mother.
Right.
And so from that situation, I could see the decline of, they didn't want me involved. They wanted
No.
to handle it. They wanted to brush it under the rug and
Right.
it not even be brought to my attention.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
we
think
see that the detriment of it is the decline of the family, decline of parental rights. We're going to
mhm,
step in. And if you stop and think about it, this is government school.
right.
So when you send your children to school there, who is responsible for them? Whose authority are they under? They are sole responsibility of the school, the
mhm,
government.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, uh that's how school works. No matter public and private, the school does not work for the parents or nor the teacher. I mean, student.
Right.
Think about that. As a teacher, as a teacher, I'm accountable to the principal, right?
It's a business.
Right,
It's run
because
as a
she
business.
decide or he decide whether or not they can get contract for next year, right?
Mhm.
So of course,
Absolutely.
and what, but and the principals and the headmasters, they are accountable to the school board,
Mhm.
right? And the school board, in a way, they're accountable to the government. So the parents are not nowhere in that system.
They're right. They're not in the equation.
Right.
It's not part of the business model.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Yeah. And also, one of the, I think, very harmful thing is the grade inflation, because the
Mhm.
grades had inflated so much that it become meaningless. I mean, the student can get A or B, doesn't mean that they actually learned anything.
Right.
So that is one of the things the parents get misled. They
Mhm.
thought their kids got a good education, but
Absolutely. I sat in an IEP meeting for my ninth grader
mhm,
and was alarmed. I was actually appalled sitting
okay,
there being told that the kids have all they need to know by their devices. Their role as teachers are to just merely guide them and show them how to find the answers. That's what I
wow,
was told at an IEP meeting, that the kids have all the knowledge they have on their devices. We just need to teach them how to find it. So in my
really,
mind, I sat here thinking, so where does the learning take place if
right,
we're just merely going to have them find the answers on devices? And so again, I thought, does this stem from COVID, from everybody being online and kids that are getting back into the hybrid model? Yeah, I was just floored that this was the mindset of a teacher telling me that they have all
wow,
the answers they need in front of them. Hence, middle school, there's no homework. I brought that up in middle school. Why is there no homework? As
okay,
we know, once you get to high school, the high school course load is a lot.
mm-hmm,
Ninth grade year is always known as a pivotal year for kids because it's a
right,
transition year. So you're going
right.
from middle school of having no homework now to high school coming out with 3 to 4 hours of homework a night. So does that not set our children up for failure when we do
Right.
that?
What's their rationale for not having homework?
When I was asked about it, I was told they give the students enough time in middle school to
Okay.
get the homework done. They are allowed to do it at home. The only time that they would have homework is if it wasn't done, it wasn't completed in school.
Okay. Okay.
So we saw the transition. I wasn't the only one, especially in special needs, where the kids were getting basically dumped into high school with not getting the services that they need.
Right. Definitely. Yeah.
And so
Definitely.
I think that part of the problem that we have with the ESSER and the money that we see that's flowing into all these schools is, how is that money going to be used appropriately? And what I mean appropriately is we have this education gap that we keep hearing about year
Right.
after year
Right.
that we want to try to close. And how are we best going to be able to do that?
Mhm.
Well, how are we going to do it when we're teaching in terms of equity, where we're taking from the top,
Right.
trying to bring up the bottom, but
Right.
teach to the middle?
Right.
So we're going to have kids that are going to constantly fall out. And when we see what we saw in COVID from last year, kids that were failing didn't fail the grade. They were automatically pushed up to the next grade because of COVID.
Oh, wow. So they don't even bother to evaluate.
No.
And they
So
just,
what we had was, because we just pushed them off. So what we see is that learning gap is part of those funds for ESSER funds are to go for catch up.
mhm,
So my whole idea was, how do we have a student that isn't passing algebra 1 going to
mhm.
be able to get moved on to algebra 2 if they didn't
Right.
understand
Right.
how to do the algebra 1? Are we not setting up for failure? So there was just things that I was seeing that were flaws, especially in my son's class. He was in algebra 1. It was brought to my attention again at IEP meeting. He was getting all A's on all the homework. He would get a test and he'd fail the test.
Right.
And, as a parent, that's a red flag, because we're getting homework done. We're acing the homework, but we're
Right.
failing a test.
Right.
So when I brought that up, I said, well, how can that be? He's getting all A's on the homework. Well, we're not grading the homework. We just look and see if he's got work on the paper. And if it looks like he's got work on the paper, we're giving him basically an A for effort.
Right. Yep.
So it doesn't, again, it comes back to, what are we really grading and assessing at that point? He
Nothing.
obviously isn't
Yeah.
getting any of the information. He isn't gaining it.
Right.
So therefore, that's why we see the decline in test skills
Yep.
when we have standardized tests, because the kids aren't gaining it.
No,
They're not
no,
learning it.
no. And also like when I was at the GCA is that when the kids take a test, even they get everything wrong but they still get 50%.
Mhm.
So which means like you say, if they get A's on homework and test, they don't get anything, they still get 50%. It's pretty much automatically put them into B, if not
Right.
A. So which means that they got B or A without understanding anything. Yeah,
Mhm.
I was shocked when I actually first when I heard about that, when I started to teach there, but I learned
Mhm.
that, I mean, other schools do the same thing. So
Yeah,
therefore we
I
just
would,
have to do it.
it's across the board
Right.
on schools that you see that it's almost just become a standard practice.
Yeah. And that time, I mean, at GCA, I think I was probably, I mean, as far as I understand it, I was the only one, based on feedback from my student, I was the only one actually checking their answers and to make
Mhm.
sure they got right. If they got wrong, I'll take some point off. So basically from my student, they said that other teachers don't do that.
Right. Which I
And,
find that amazing, because it's math. I mean, it's
right,
either wrong or it's right.
right, right. I mean, if you're wrong, you definitely, you want to point out, right? You're going to
Right.
take out some points, and they do allow them, to make corrections. And normally when
Mhm.
we get corrections, I get them half the point. I won't get them full back, because you want to see where they at, right? And also,
Absolutely. And that's the learning process,
right,
is also the student learning where they went wrong.
right, and teach them like you have to work hard. You have to get, I mean, to get the, to get the A, you have to put the effort. But nowadays, no, not even that. You don't have to put the
Right.
effort. And also the equity thing make it that even worse.
Right.
So
Well, and that's the other thing that we see is, instead of utilizing tools for the students that need it in the name of equity, we see some of these programs being built in across the board for all students. So where we have students that have difficulty with reading, whether or not they are deemed dyslexic or they have any other disabilities, we see those tools being implemented across the board. So not just the ones that are having problems with reading, we're using those tools that will go in and read the text to the students.
Right.
So kids that don't have the reading problem could end up be using those. Is that
Yep.
pushing them to keep reading further, or is it, we're using it? So we really, I think, have to stop and look at how those tools are being utilized.
Right.
And is it because we're not picking up on those kids that have the disabilities that need it? We're just going to offer it to all.
Right. I mean, that's what I heard also, is that instead to qualify that they are reading at fourth, let's say, for example, at 5th grade level, even though the kids cannot read, but you have someone read to them.
Right.
And then you just pass the test. And
Right.
they are counted as reading at the grade level, which is, I mean, also, it also point out the system was designed, not for the student. The system was designed as a business model. You're trying to get as much money as you can, right? Now,
Right.
if the government wants to say, you made a gain, well, let's just inflate the grades or do something to show that everybody catched up.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
pretty sad. Yeah, but I think parents really needs to, that's needs to realize what's going on, and that's really the reason I want to start my show, is to expose that, because most parents, they just don't know.
Right.
They just don't know how
The
bad
only
it
way,
is.
the only way that they see that is like what we see is in the standardized testing. So standardized testing are done, that those tests were designed to basically create a blip to say,
Right.
okay, at this 3rd grade level, they should be doing this. And
Right.
here's the kids that are falling out of that. But what we see now is when you change from testing to I ready, I learn, you lose the baseline of a testing of a new year.
Right.
And so what we're seeing is the scores across the board, are only about 45 to 50% are passing the I learn. So when you have to start digging down and looking in the detail of that stuff and start seeing why is that? So again, we see the push of social emotional learning. Well,
Right.
of course, they're using that as well, the guise of we have to teach the whole child.
Right.
We
Right.
need to
Right.
focus on the social emotional learning. If we focus on that, we'll bring the grades up.
Right.
It's not, we need to focus on our learning, on our tools of
Right.
reading, writing, and arithmetic, the basics of what those tests are designed
Right.
to test
Exactly.
for.
Yeah, exactly. And also make the test meaningful, because if they inflate grades, then the testing become really meaningless. And that's, I think, what's
Absolutely.
happening. Yeah. And also there is a push, at least from teachers union, is to get rid of standardized testing, because they think that's that's part of the white culture. Yeah. I mean, even they talk about math is, you shouldn't have like only one answer, right answer versus bad and wrong answer. They think that is part of the white culture too. This whole thing is just crazy. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just, it's kind of gone the total other direction of, focusing on academics. And that's what I think, hopefully, at the end of the day, a lot of parents had started to realize with
Right.
all this is that the push away from academics.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what we're getting into is not going in the right direction.
Right.
So,
And yeah, and it doesn't even help, doesn't really help kids in terms how to manage their emotions, or how to, how to work with other people. Is really teach them the opposite. It make them become like a victim, have this victim mindset, is that it's everybody else's fault. Right.
Well, I think when you start talking to children about their emotions on a daily basis, when we're constantly asking how they're doing, how they're feeling, we're doing questions on a daily basis. I think at some point the children are going to realize, why are you keep asking me these questions? Why do we keep talking about how I'm feeling and what are we doing? Does that mean I'm supposed to be thinking and feeling the way that you keep pressing me to feel? How am I really? So I think that it becomes a little bit more suggestive when we continue to do this on a consistent basis.
Yeah, definitely. And also it sends the wrong message that the feeling is the most important thing. Sometimes you don't feel well, you still have to get things done, right?
Right.
So
Right.
this is the wrong way of handling this. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much. I actually learned a lot from you. I mean, you really helped me to, in a way, to understand social emotional learning, because I was kind of puzzled by that. But
Mhm.
I think your experience and the examples you use really kind of give me the concrete, examples
Sure.
help me to understand it. Well,
Sure. Like
yeah,
I said, I hope that, parents wake up, they see it. Homeschooling has been a blessing in my life.
right,
The Indiana Association of Home Educators is a great resource for parents. We are
right,
seeing a huge push of kids, parents that are moving their kids to homeschooling for just these various reasons.
right,
And that there are the options out there, and that parents are pulling together. We see co-ops, we see
exactly,
parents are able to do this. Parents can do it.
right,
And
yeah,
I think that as much as the system doesn't want parents to believe that they can do it, they can do it.
right,
God has given these children to these parents, and
exactly,
the parents have the skills to
yeah,
do it.
yeah. Well, actually, I really want to interview you again, because my original purpose is have you talk about homeschooling and all of that. But then, since we talk about social immersion learning, we can digress a little bit. But
Sure.
but it worked out pretty well, because it definitely helped me. I think it will help other parents. So I definitely want to interview you again and just focus on homeschooling side of it. Is like, say, the parents, they took their kids, bring their kids home, then what going to do, right? Most of the kids,
Absolutely.
in a way, they are scared. They thought they are not qualified, but that's not true.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. It's a process. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Ping.
All right. I'll see
Have a
you.
great evening. Thank
Yeah, you
you.
too. Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye.